Hi, this is Amber Von Harten. I'm the Outreach Specialist for the South Atlantic Council, and this is presentation 1 of 5 that will give you an overview of the South Atlantic Fishery Management Council. And this presentation is being given for the COBIA Q&A meeting that's being held May 9th, 2016 up in Kitty Hawk, North Carolina. So just to give you an overview of how the councils got started, in 1976, the Magnuson-Stevens Fishery Management Act was established. This is the federal fishery management legislation that was put in place to help deal with foreign fishing fleets that were harvesting fish stocks off of the U.S. And they also put in place the 8 regional fishery management councils that all had the common goal to conserve and manage federal fisheries in the U.S. The councils are the management bodies that establish fishery management plans and amendments to those plans for the fish stocks off the coast of each of the 8 regional councils. Here's a map of all the 8 fishery management councils in the U.S. The turquoise blue color over here is the South Atlantic's jurisdiction, and you'll see also the red here is the Mid-Atlantic, New England, and the yellow, the Gulf of Mexico in orange, Caribbean in purple. Up here in hot pink is the North Pacific. In green, the Pacific, and then in blue, the Western Pacific. So a little bit about the South Atlantic's jurisdiction. We obviously manage federal fisheries in the EEZ, the Exclusive Economic Zone, which spans from 3 miles from shore all the way out to 200 nautical miles off the U.S. coast. The states that we cover in the South Atlantic region are from North Carolina all the way down to the Florida Keys on the east coast of Florida. So the boundary between the South Atlantic and the Mid-Atlantic is right up there at the North Carolina and Virginia border. You'll see that here in red. For COBIA, which is managed under the Coastal Migratory Pelagics Fishery Management Plan in the South Atlantic and includes also king and Spanish mackerel, the COBIA and king and Spanish mackerel is managed in both the South Atlantic and Mid-Atlantic jurisdictions by the South Atlantic Council all the way up through New York. Same thing is similar for dolphin and wahoo. It covers the South Atlantic, Mid-Atlantic, and Northeast New England jurisdictions. So how are the councils, what are they made up of? They are made up of 17 members in the South Atlantic. They're representatives from each of the state's marine resource agencies. 2 representatives from each state, which generally are 1 commercial fishing representative and 1 recreational representative, as well as the federal partners. So there are 13 voting members on the council. That also includes 2 voting seats from the Mid-Atlantic Council on the Coastal Migratory Pelagics Committee. The federal partners that have a voting seat at the table include NOAA Fisheries, or National Marine Fisheries Service. And then we have some non-voting members that vote on committees, but not at full council, and that includes the U.S. Coast Guard, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission, as well as the Department of State. So how are council members appointed? There are both at-large and obligatory members to the council, and the governors of each state nominate the members for review and appointment by the actual Secretary of State. The council appoints a new chair and vice chair to serve 2-year terms. And these are our current council chair and vice chair, Dr. Michelle Duvall, who is from North Carolina Division of Marine Fisheries, and Charlie Phillips, who is a wholesale seafood dealer and snapper grouper fisherman from down in Georgia. Council staff is located here in Charleston, South Carolina, and our executive director is Greg Wall. Plus we have a whole host of technical staff as well as administrative staff that make up our team, and a full listing of all the council members, the committee staff, and also advisory panel members are available on our website. So what does the council manage? In the South Atlantic, we have several different fishery management plans, which you'll see here on the screen. As I mentioned earlier, COBIA is managed under the Coastal Migratory Pelagics Management Plan. We also have plans for coral, dolphin wahoo, golden crab, habitat, sargassum, shrimp, and we also manage deep water shrimp as well in the South Atlantic, which would include rock shrimp. Snapper grouper, which is our largest fishery management plan and consists of over 59 species in that complex. Spiny lobster, and also we have a fishery ecosystem plan, which is currently being updated. Just like the management plans, we also have committees that discuss all the different management measures at the council meetings, which are centered around those fishery management plans. So you'll see those listed here on the screen. We also have a couple of other committees at the council level, which include law enforcement, also data collection, and then we have some administrative committees that include advisory panel selection and SSC, which is the Scientific and Statistical Committee selection, executive finance, and also CDAR, which is related to our stock assessment program. So the committees are responsible for developing management alternatives for the amendments that go through the council process. And then the full council is responsible for the actual final decisions. So the way a council meeting works is the committees will meet throughout the week of the council meeting, and then usually on the last day of the council meeting, the full council will meet, which is everybody on the council, and that's when the actual voting takes place. So who are the key players in the federal fisheries regulatory process? As you'll learn through this presentation, the council process tries to be as open and transparent as possible, as well as provide ample opportunity for the public to participate throughout the process. So that's kind of the cornerstone of the whole council process, is that public input. The council is also informed by several different advisory bodies, one being the Scientific and Statistical Committee, which is a group of scientists that helps develop recommendations for management measures to the council. This also includes a socioeconomic panel, which is made up of social scientists and economists that can help give advice to the council on those types of issues. All of our science is driven by the CDAR stock assessment program. This is the program that conducts the stock assessments in the region, and that is held through a three-step process that helps determine the data that's going to be used, and then the assessment of the models that have been used to run the data, and then also a review of the final results of the model. And then we also have advisory panels that are made up of fishermen that help advise the council as well, and we'll get into that here in a minute. So the council, as I said, gathers input from scientists and fishing stakeholders and helps develop the fishery management plans for all the fisheries that the council manages. Once the council reviews an amendment and takes final action on it, that amendment then goes up to NOAA Fisheries, where they then review the amendment. And then eventually it goes up to the Secretary of Commerce for final approval and implementation. And the Secretary of Commerce has the option to approve, disapprove, or partially approve different amendments that come through based on the information available and stakeholder input. So who does what? Just wanted to include some information to clarify what roles each agency plays in the process. So let's go over first what the council's roles are in the process. So typically an issue is identified, typically a lot of times from the fishermen directly. They'll come to the council with a problem that they're seeing in a specific fishery, and the council starts to identify that issue and start to develop ways to address it. And that first step in the process is usually through scoping. And we have scoping meetings that are held where we have the issues presented, and we go out to the public and have public meetings and webinars and ask fishermen, here's the issue, what are some ways that you feel that the council could address this? After scoping meetings, the council then gathers all of that information from staff, and they review the recommendations that came in from the public. Then the next step is through public hearings. So that's the second step in the process, where we allow ample and lots of different opportunities for public input. And usually there'll be a public hearing draft document at that time which actually outlines all the different options that are being considered and alternatives under each option. And once staff has compiled the input from those public hearings, then the council will review that information again, modify the amendment as necessary, and then within a meeting or two usually takes final action on an amendment. So the council will vote on that on the last day of their meeting and take final action. And then that's where the council's role in the process stops and begins with National Marine Fisheries Service, or NOAA Fisheries. So their role is they receive the amendment from the council and they begin reviewing it and begin the rulemaking process. And there's several opportunities there as well in the rulemaking process for the public to submit comment. The first is during the notice of availability. This is when they put the public on notice that this rulemaking process has begun and outline what's being proposed. Then the next step is the actual proposed rule, which is the second opportunity for you to comment on the actions that are being proposed. And then the Secretary of Commerce makes their decision on approval of the amendment, and the final rule is then released. And all of these different rulemaking opportunities have specific deadlines, and you can find information about how to submit comment on each of the rulemaking steps in the Federal Register notice when they come out, and typically NOAA Fisheries will also send out a fishery bulletin to notify the public of the public comment opportunity. And then once the final rule announces an implementation date or effective date, the regulation is actually implemented, and NOAA Fisheries is actually responsible for enforcement of the regulations, as well as the collection of catch data and also quota monitoring. So they're the ones that help keep up with how many fish are being caught and when annual catch limits have been met. So any item that you see in blue on this screen are the different steps in the process where you can actually get involved and submit your public comments. There's a few policy mandates that the council is required by law to consider when they're making their management decisions. As we already outlined, the Magnuson-Stevens Act is the main federal piece of legislation that drives federal fisheries management. That's governed by 10 different national standards. It was reauthorized in 2007, and the current reauthorization is in progress. There's a couple of others that are really important, and that's the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA, which mandates that there's different alternatives and options that are developed by the council for under consideration for each management measure. Also, the Marine Mammal Protection Act and the Endangered Species Act play a role in helping to develop different management measures as well. So some things to consider about developing management plans and amendments. The council doesn't just have to consider the biology of the fish stock, but they also need to take into consideration by law the social and economic impacts of their management decisions when they're developing different management measures. So all those three pieces of the puzzle come together to develop federal fisheries management with the ultimate goal of ending overfishing immediately. Some of the data collection that goes on that helps inform a lot of the science that goes into management includes different types of biological data. So how do we know if there are enough fish? There's a couple different ways that data are collected, and the first is through fishery dependent data. So that's data that's collected from fishermen. For the recreational sector and commercial sector, there's logbook data programs. There's one being developed right now for the charter sector in the South Atlantic that might incorporate electronic reporting. Also intercepts from port agents at the different docks as well as at boat landings. And the main recreational data collection program is called the Marine Recreational Information Program. It was formerly the Marine Recreational Fisheries Statistics Survey, and this program collects recreational data through a couple of different ways. One is through intercepts at area boat landings to determine the number of fish per trip that are being caught. And now they're modifying the second component of the survey. It used to be a phone survey to determine effort in the fishery, and that's being transitioned to a mail survey to help determine the number of trips that are being taken recreationally. Then also the wholesale seafood dealers also have to submit trip tickets as well as part of the data collection program. The other part of data collection includes fishery independent And this is primarily conducted through different research surveys. So this is based on data that's being collected from scientists themselves. So the big one that's in our region is called MARMAP, and this is the survey that goes out and collects data on a lot of offshore species using various types of gear. One of them is this chevron trap that you see in this picture here. They also use long line gear, and this is where they get a lot of the age and growth data on many of the species that the council manages. This is a picture of some vermilion snapper being measured and weighed, and also the otoliths, or the ear bones, being taken out of this black sea bass, and also gonads. As I mentioned, economic and social impacts are also really important to any decisions being made by the council. So considering economic impacts of the options being considered and how those management measures will affect the fishing community. As I mentioned earlier, the Magnuson-Stevens Act was reauthorized in 2007, signed into place by President Bush, and it mandated that the councils needed to end overfishing immediately and establish something called an annual catch limit, or an ACL, as well as accountability measures by 2010. And they needed to rebuild overfished stocks and establish those ACLs and AMs by 2011. So what exactly is an annual catch limit? It's the amount of fish in numbers or pounds that can be harvested in a single year. And this is based on the acceptable biological catch that's set by the Scientific and Statistical Committee, which works with the council to provide advice and guidance on management measures. It also addresses allocations. So typically that annual catch limit is divided up by sector, by both the commercial sector and the recreational sector. And keep in mind that the recreational sector also includes the for-hire charter sector. And then it also, the Magnuson reauthorization required accountability measures. And these are measures that ensure that the annual catch limits are not exceeded. These are developed by the council, and they have lots of different ways they can choose to implement accountability measures. And some of the examples include an in-season closure. So say the annual catch limit had been projected to be met, they could close the fishery within the season. There's also an option for possible payback provisions. So if you go over 1 year, you have to pay back the amount of pounds or number of fish the next year, or things like seasonal closures. So this is a diagram of our acronym soup here, and I'll go through each of these here. But the main thing is to notice that the items that are colored in gray, these are items that are actually set by the council's Scientific and Statistical Committee, so it's set by scientists, and the ones in purple are set by the actual council. So overfishing level is what the SSC recommends. Also, the acceptable biological catch is recommended by the SSC. This is where some of the uncertainty can come into play, and it's dealing with the assessment. There can be some assessment uncertainty when setting these different levels. And then as we get into the purple areas, the annual catch limit, again, this is something that the council sets, and it can be set equal to the acceptable biological catch, but not above. And typically it's usually separated by sector. So again, it can be separated into a commercial ACL and then also into a recreational ACL. ACTs are something called an annual catch target. This is something also that the council decides and can be separated by sector. And this is what typically they want to aim for. That you can't aim for the annual catch limit, you want to aim for the annual catch target. And then the accountability measures, as I just described, are measures put in place to make sure that the ACL is not exceeded. And again, those can be separated out by sector. The role of the Scientific and Statistical Committee is that they review the fishery management plans and the amendments that are coming through the council process. And again, they, as I mentioned earlier, they set the ABC as well as the overfishing levels, and their information and their recommendations are based on the CDAR stock assessment process. And CDAR stands for Southeast Data Assessment and Review. But really, public participation is key in the whole process. It's mandated by law, and it's essential to the council process and development of all the different management plans. And you'll see this is a picture of a fisherman giving public comment at one of our council meetings, which we always hold a public comment session, usually on the Wednesday evening of our council meetings. As I mentioned earlier, the council also really relies on advisory panels. We have 12 of them in our council process, and you'll see them listed here. As I mentioned earlier, the advisory panels are made up of people that have a stake in the fishery. So it includes recreational fishermen, charter and for hire fishermen, commercial fishermen, wholesale, retail business owners, representatives of environmental organizations, also the media, as well as scientists. The role that the APs play is they offer their advice on the different assessments and amendments that are coming through the council process. So they will look at things such as capacity and extent to which the fishing vessels will harvest the resources considered in the FMPs, the effect the measures have on different local economies and social structures, any potential conflicts between user groups, as well as enforcement problems that may arise in each fishery, with emphasis on what to expect. They also provide recommendations through a formal report that gets submitted to the council committee during the council meeting. AP recommendations are considered by the council committees when they discuss the different alternatives for the fishery management plans and amendments. So really the AP members are a huge source of information and ground truthing when it comes to developing the management measures brought forward by the council. So just to give you an update on the latest on the mackerel AP, which includes cobia, is they had a recent AP meeting in February 2016, and they provided input on cobia at that time, and they will provide additional input prior to the September 2016 council meeting as well. And again, additional public input happens at lots of different stages throughout the process. I mentioned the public scoping meetings and public hearings that we have. You can also submit written comment to the council, and we provide information on how to do that during each step of the process. And then we've also been having a lot of Q&A meetings and webinars. Typically we'll have a Q&A session with council staff prior to public hearings. We'll have webinars set up where we provide a presentation about the different amendments, and then you can have a few minutes to have council staff answer your questions before you go to these public hearings, so that you're a little bit better up to speed on exactly what the amendment is proposing, and you can have good focused conversation with your council members at the public hearings. And then, of course, we're having this Q&A meeting for cobia specifically as we start to develop future management measures for cobia moving forward. Just a little snippet of information about how to keep up with regulations in the region. Our website is a great resource of information about the latest and greatest on all the council news, as well as a history of all the fishery management plans that the council has developed over the years. Also, NOAA Fisheries annual catch limit monitoring pages are great resources to help you keep track of how many fish have been caught throughout the year, and whether or not a fishery is open and what percentage of the catch has been caught in relation to the annual catch limit. And then also we have a great free mobile app called SA Fishing Regulations that you can download on Android or Apple products that has all of the fishing regulations in the South Atlantic, as well as information about our managed areas that the council has jurisdiction over. And if you have any questions, feel free to give me a shout at the council office here. And also be sure to tune in to our social media sites. We have a Facebook page, a Twitter account, and also a YouTube channel where you can view all the videos that we post about our amendments and latest issues in the region. Thanks.